Greetings all, and welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. We're going to continue our discussion of literacy instruction for English language learners, and we're getting a lot of this information from that book right over there by Claude Jeunesse and Hamayan. You may want to check that book out. Today we're going to be looking at emergent literacy in a second language program. We're going to be focusing on some of the things that you should be doing at the beginning stages and what focus that you should have on those beginning stages when you're working with a group of students and with developing a curriculum. First thing on the list here is to know your students. This is something that I do all the time. I call it a needs analysis. What I want to do is I want to get to know my students. I want to find out what their backgrounds are, what information they already know, what are their interests, what is their first language ability, what is their second language ability. And with a lot of that information, I can work in my classroom to try to give them motivating materials, interesting materials that not only provide them opportunity to grow language, but also to grow in the content of the school where they're at. You may also want to investigate the community that they live in. What types of, what's their cultural backgrounds? What are the cultural norms? What are the activities that are possibly there? It's good for students living in the United States, if they're going to be studying language, to also know and have opportunity to work in their own language and in their own culture. If you have a community where that's possible, that would be a good thing, especially if these students are wanting to learn that first language, first culture more and in written form. So you want to investigate the community. What things are there for them to interact with and to learn from, and what type of support structures are there or aren't there. So it's good to know all of that. The last thing that you want to investigate are the literacy activities that your students have in both languages. For example, in the first language, do they go home and do they have, can they read and write in their first language? Do they have anyone there who can help them and continue them learning in that first language? And then, of course, in the second language, English in this case. Do they have opportunities to do that? Does the culture provide for or encourage those activities? It's amazing to me, having lived over in Japan, the number of students who, before they even get to kindergarten, they know a lot of their characters and can read already, because the parents are stressing that when their kids are growing up and before they get into school. Other cultures aren't that way, so you want to find out what opportunities there are, again, in both cultures, in both language opportunities. You can do this, and if you can do this, you're going to be able to know your students better and be better prepared to provide for their needs, and that's the main thing that we're looking at there. Okay, in addition to getting to know your students, you want to prepare your curriculum. You want to think about what items that you need to be teaching. And depending on where you are and what stages you're dealing with, you may begin at the very lowest level. And of course, there's all these different components that you'll want to be able to prepare for. You may have to teach students the different sounds, the different letters. They may need to learn about writing. The basic writing skills, having to practice writing their letters. Or they may need basic words or basic sentences. And if it were up to me, I would stress that we oftentimes, when we're teaching students, that we let them know what those basic sentence structures are. If they can see what those basic sentence structures are, it's going to help them better prepare for their writing opportunities. Okay, in addition to your basic elements, you're also going to try to look for opportunities to give them a chance to learn top up and bottom down. Take that back. Top down and bottom up processing. Top down processing is when you have a main idea or a big idea and you want to break it down and look at the components. Bottom up, of course, is the opposite direction. And you use both of these, and oftentimes you use them at the same time when you are processing information, when you're trying to decipher or encode or decode information. I know that there are many times where I'm talking with somebody in Japanese, and all of a sudden they shoot out a word that I don't know. Or they start talking about a whole concept that I don't know. Normally, I am up here in the top-down, I'm understanding what they're saying, and all of a sudden there's a word I don't know, and I've got to go down there and say, okay, well, what does that mean? try to figure out what that word means. And there are times where I can't just do it from the one word. I can't ask for an explanation or a synonym or, have them, explain to me what that means. I'll go to top-down processing. Then I say, okay, well, use it in a sentence. Okay, use it in another sentence. And I can see how it's used in this big ordeal, and I can kind of figure out more of what that idea is. Your students need to know the top-down processing and the bottom-up processing to help them succeed in language learning. That's a skill, I guess you would call it. There's also some literacy development practices. We already talked about the top-down and the bottom-up. But when you're teaching, you should try to use meaningful content. Meaningful context. Make sure that what you're teaching is going to be actually useful to them. You're not just producing materials and something that they have to learn because they have to learn. The story that I remember is of a teacher who, when he was studying and learning German, the only thing he remembered while he was studying 4 years of German was the phrase, when someone asks the question, do you know where the train station is? And the answer would be, go down two blocks and turn left. And that's all he ever remembered. And it really wasn't useful to him until about 20 years later when he happened to be leaving a conference and he was in Germany. And someone tapped him on the shoulder and he turned around and they said, excuse me, do you know where the train station is? Without thinking, the only thing that he knew, right, it didn't make sense to him at the time, he said, go down 2 blocks and make a left. And a person walked away and obviously had no idea where he was going. So when you're providing context and content, make sure that it's meaningful. Also try to have activities that are interactive. As we've seen with earlier podcasts, students will have a better opportunity of learning and understanding how to use language if they're using it in conjunction with other people. The purpose of language is to convey ideas to others, right? So having interactive activities is often a good thing. I often work in small groups or pairs to give students opportunities to practice. It's a great thing to do, and you should be including that in your classes. With regard to teaching reading and writing, you'll want to teach about those things, but you also want to model. I often, when I'm teaching writing, and I will have students write a paragraph, I'm also writing a paragraph with them. And I may write the paragraph and describe what I'm doing first, and then let them go ahead and try to follow that example, so that they can learn those processes. Same thing with reading, where maybe I do a skim or a scan, or I try to do an overview of it and look for the main idea before I delve into the details type of thing. Just again, so that you can be that model. Now, some people will disagree with my idea as far as teaching writing. They don't think that we should necessarily model it, but just let the students write. That may be okay for native speakers, but for second language learners, they have no frame of reference to understand what it is that we're looking for. And so for those students from a different culture, right, our second language learners, it'd be better to give them a model. That doesn't mean they have to follow the model, but it's just giving them a frame of reference so they can begin. You may even want to think of them as training wheels so that they can learn how to ride the bike, and afterwards you can take the training wheels off. But they need some form of some frame of reference, at least at the beginning. So teaching and modeling reading and writing. Some other literacy development ideas that you may want to include here. We've already talked about making sure that it's meaningful and that it's interesting and that it's interactive. Another thing that you'll want to do is try to create activities that build on oral skills. Language, as you know, as you're learning a language, you typically build on the ideas that you have onto new ideas, so that students are not trying to just swim out there in the middle of nowhere. They're connected to something. So it is with reading and writing. The opportunity then here is to try to build off of their oral skills. They try to get into then the reading and the writing. That's going to make it an easier step for them. Some other literacy development ideas. You should try to include the teaching of encoding and decoding. And so you'll want to talk about some of these strategies. And that's really what these are. They're strategies for encoding, strategies for decoding information. strategies for having people slow down so that you have time to process, or slow down so that you have time to process what somebody else is saying. So it's going to be either way. Another thing you'll want to do is focus on high-frequency vocabulary. There are about, well, some would say 2. I would probably go closer to 3,000 words that are the mainstay. They are the primary words that everyone uses every day. So you'll want to focus on those. I always say that it kind of looks like a tree, language. And you've got this trunk here, you know, with all your roots and whatnot. But this is the main language components that you have right here. And then off of that, you've got all these different branches of things. You know, that one of these might be banking, or one of these might be history, one of these might be biology, they might be medical things. Okay, and those are specialized words and phrases that we have off in those given fields of study. But the trunk, the main thrust of the language, is still going to be those 3,000 words. Now, all combined, people use somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 words in their everyday average life. In a college, it's probably closer to the 10,000 words because of the different fields of study that we're involved in. But the trunk is where you ought to start, so that they can be involved in your basic interpersonal communication skills. So we want to begin with that. Obviously, we can't end there, but you want to start out there focusing on high-frequency vocabulary. The other thing that you want to focus on is giving them opportunities to practice. One of the things that students need to work on is their fluency. That's one of the 4 strands that I would recommend that you do. It's actually not my recommendation. That's Nation's idea, where he kind of looks at all these principles that are involved in teaching language, all these components, and he would say that you should focus on those 4 strands first. So let's finish this first, and then we'll go take a peek at Nation. In addition to offering opportunities to practice, so provide lots of opportunities, whether they're in class or out of class. Give them opportunities to practice. Should also use a variety of types of literacy, a variety of types of communication devices, whether they're doing things on a typewriter, they're writing by hand, or they're looking at a photograph or some type of a graphic, or they're watching a movie or a TV show or a commercial. Provide multiple ways where they can get information. 1, so that they can practice with it, and 2, that they can realize, I can learn off of a commercial. I can learn off of information there. Another aside here. I think it's interesting that some cultures don't think that it's a way to learn language is to learn off of the TV or off of a commercial. I've met a number of students, primarily from Europe, who've come here not knowing any English, and they said, but they watched TV, you know, incessantly for I don't know how long, and now they've got a job. They're working somewhere using the English language. Now, there's obviously a closer connection between the Romance languages, the Latin-based languages, and English. But there are people from other cultures, I never see them try to do that, and they don't get that advantage there. So, again, use a variety of different types. Lastly, connect your activities to things that they can do at home, or things that they can do at school or in their community, and you want to link that together with your school activities so that, again, it's more meaningful and they can have more ownership over it. Now, earlier I mentioned about the 4 strands that Nation describes. We'll just take a quick peek here. These are the 4 strands that Nation talked about. Language should be broken down into meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language focus, and fluency development. And it's these 4 areas that you want to focus on. If you go back and look at what we were talking about earlier, we're talking about the reading and writing, listening and speaking. Well, meaning-focused input has more to do with listening and speaking. I'm sorry. Input has to do with listening and reading. And so we want to have some meaning-focused input, something that's meaningful that's coming into them, whether it's listening or whether it's reading. So that's one way area. The next would be meaning-focused output. And that's going to be more involved in your speaking and writing. Opportunities for them to practice, taking what they've heard or what they've seen and to push it out, pushed output production. And so we got meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, and those are a lot of just practicing. Some of the skills and whatnot. But then he goes on to the 3rd section here, which is language-focused learning. And those are other activities where you're actually focusing on the nuts and bolts of language, the syntax, the morphology, the cognates, and that type of thing as far as a focus. And then the last thing that he talks about is fluency development. Now, that's where you're taking all of these skills and strategies and components, content, and using it in such a way that it flows, which is hopefully the way I'm trying to talk without as many ahs and ums, right? I have a flow through your language. That's another area that students are going to want to practice as they're learning language. So those are the 4 strands that he talks about that we should be focusing on when we're teaching. Okay, let's move on to some of the other segments here that Cloud and Janessa and Hamayan talk about. They've also talked about some writing methods, some guided writing. What I mean by guided writing is, again, you're going to model, you're going to show and explain, and then you're going to model how this is done. And again, they're going to talk to you about trying to do writing from basic to more complex. So you're going to begin with just a word or 2 words or phrases, and then simple sentences, and go through the block of sentences that there are. And eventually you're going to go up to paragraphs and essays and, papers or novels or whatever it is they're going to writing at the end. So you want to begin at the beginning and move on to more complex. You want to encourage creativity. It's hard to be creative at the beginning because they have no skill. They may have ideas, but they don't have the skill to put it into words. So you're going to need a lot more scaffolding at the beginning. But encourage that, because once they do it, they become much more motivated. I can't tell you the times where I've seen the students say, I don't want to do a speech. I'm too scared. I can't do it. And you walk them through the process of writing a speech. You walk them through the process of, practicing and gaining some confidence and some presence. And then they do the speech, and when they're done, they're so excited. Yes, I can do this. I don't know how many times I've seen that in my teaching history. So encourage them to be creative. Recognize that they're going to need some scaffolding along the way. Also have students possibly present their writing. Again, a speaking opportunity, an output opportunity, but it also means that they can be more proud of what they're doing. Again, you may have some students that kind of freak out when you say, hey, we're going to be presenting these, because they don't want anybody to see their work. Okay, but I would encourage you to, have them have the courage, the bravery to do that, and it should be a benefit to all who are there. Some reading method guides. These guys here, Cloud and Janessa and Hamayan, suggest that you get a group of people that are similarly skilled, the same level of language learning, and find them a text that's, again, culturally relevant. Do some pre-teaching where you show them the vocabulary and some sentence structure if there are any there. And then you have them work on reading and modeling the material that they're reading, having some public reading so that they can practice with fluency. And there are times when you're going through the reading that you're going to have people who say, well, what does this mean? Or what is this construction? And it's a great opportunity for you to focus on form. Form is obviously the syntax, the grammar that you want to focus on is always important. But at the same time, in a reading scenario, you want to focus on the flow of ideas. You want to focus on what's happening in the story. You don't necessarily want to focus on, what's happening with this little segment here. It's kind of like if you're watching a race, and people are, driving cars or riding bikes or whatever they're doing, and all of a sudden one guy, he gets a flat tire. Now you're focused on fixing the piece there of the tire, of the car, of the bike or whatever, and not the actual race that's going on. But focus on form is a great opportunity, because at that point, as you're doing a story, as you're reading whatever, and someone has a question about grammar or syntax or whatever, you can focus in on that and everybody zooms in with you. It's a great, not an object lesson, but it's a great opportunity because everybody's hooked in and you're ready to move on. So later on, I believe they're going to be talking about extensive reading as well. It's another thing that you should look into, extensive reading. But for now, let's move on and talk about some curriculum development parts here. The components of the curriculum, well, one of the components is going to be the 4 skills. And the 4 skills, again, are reading, writing, listening, speaking. In addition to those 4 skills, you're going to have 2 databases. One of them is vocab, and one of them is grammar. And you're always going to have to be dealing with those. What vocab, what grammar, what speaking, writing, listening, hearing, speaking, writing, listening, reading skills. Boy, I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear it in my own head. We're focusing on all those skills and those databases. But so you're going to have those in the curriculum somewhere. Again, if you look at the standards that are out there, whether it's the TESOL standard or the Common Core standard or the WIDA standard, you're going to see a breakdown of reading skills, writing skills, listening, speaking, and then the vocab and grammar components as well. They'll be broken down in all these different levels within the curriculum. But that's only one segment. You're also going to want to focus on basic interpersonal communication skills. You're going to want to focus on cognitive, academic language proficiency as well. You want to focus on these, especially if your students are going to be in a public school or in a college and they're going to be learning, so that they can communicate with each other and also communicate within the academy. So you're going to be focusing on that as well. You'll be focusing on motivational content. That means you need to find content that's going to be interesting to your students. Now, it may be they're in a college, so they've already got motivated information because you're providing them information from their classes. Maybe they're here to to get a job, and they've got different motivations. Maybe they are in your class simply because they want to go to Australia for a month, and they want to learn to speak English while they're down there in Australia. I have no idea, but you want to find out what that content is. Lastly, you'll want to focus on fluency, as we said before. Those are some of the other components. I would recommend that you select culturally familiar topics. So you're dealing with young people. You want to try to deal with young people, possibly related to their culture, related material. There's a new movie coming out right now about people who are crossing the southern border of the United States, and that happens to be a rather hot topic. Something like that is may be relevant to them. You may want to find, if you have a lot of people who are coming from the Middle East, you might want to find some story or content or information related to the Middle East. Depending on where they're from, it needs to be familiar to them, just to try to hook them in. Okay, you're trying to activate that background information that they may already have. Same thing for writing. You're going to be using existing knowledge for their writing, especially when they're starting out. Don't make them go do research. Go find that typical information that's already there. Remember that they have all this extra information. They've got their own cultural information, their own cultural background information that mainstream students probably don't have, because they don't have that second culture and second language. But your students will, if they are second language learners, take advantage of that new information. Take advantage of the information that they have to use so that they can use it to talk or to write or even to learn. Lastly, you want to try to orient your students to the culture and values of life here in the United States. And that may mean that you're going to talk to them about some of the values like rugged individualism, or coming here for liberty. So another big thing here is liberty, and the freedom to do what you want, or the freedom to move up in the world, the freedom to get a good education. Again, self-reliance, a whole bunch of different things that are typical in this culture. Other values as well. The values on how we treat family, how we treat people, how we treat women, or love of animals. Just to show the differences in the culture. I remember a friend of mine came from West Africa, who was amazed when he walked into the supermarket and found an entire aisle of animal food, dog food, cat food. Because in the culture he came from, they did not feed their animals that way. Again, that's a cultural difference. So orient them to life in this culture here. Some other design principles. Again, start with what students know and build from there. Start with find out what they're interested in and use that as a stepping stone to get them involved in language learning. It would be a good idea to organize your materials into text sets. What's going on here is where you're trying to pick a block of components, some of these components that are up here, your 4 skills and 2 databases, or your content, or your Bix and Cal. Try to break it down into units or lessons or activities so that you can take a little block of it and learn that little block and then move on to another block because you're putting it into some type of sets. In addition, you want to link classroom text to home participation. If possible, You want to give your students more opportunities to practice. And one of the ways you can do that is to have your classroom activities transfer into home so that they can practice at home or they can work on it outside of classroom. So they have extra opportunities to do that. Next point here is to plan for a skills database development system where you have, again, like the WIDA system or like the TESOL system, you have a grid of information that you can set up for you and for your students so that they know what's coming next. One of the nice things about teaching language is that you can create a stepwise progression where they're going to be learning something, and then after they learn this information, they're going to come to something more difficult, or they're going to continue moving up through these steps, more difficult, more complex as they go along. You can set that up in a database or a skill set so that you and your students know what's coming next. Another thing that they talk about in the text here is to use texts that invite reflection. Don't just give them materials to read, but give them materials that force them to think and reflect so that they can write and or talk about it. Make sure that you're monitoring your student progress. That will mean that you need to assess them as you're going. And it may not be a formal test, but it may be just checking to make sure. Do they know these vocabulary? Can they use these phrases? Even the basic things like, may I go to the bathroom? Or can you help me? Or I don't understand. Those types of things. You want to monitor your students so that they can understand, so that you can see that they are in fact making progress through this database of skills that you want them to master. Use materials that make use of all the senses. It would be very good if you could use materials that make sure that they're active. They're not just sitting down, but you're making them walk around or move around, possibly even touching things that they can see, things that they can hear, and that way they have a better experience at learning, and they also have better opportunities to push things from short-term memory back into long-term memory. Lastly, take advantage of all the technologies that you can. Right now you're learning through the internet with a podcast. Well, your students may be able to learn that way as well. You might be able to find information off of a video, a short little clip that teaches whatever it is that you're going to be talking about. You can use a phone. You can use a survey, a whiteboard, a smart board where you can work off of there. You can obviously use your traditional paper and pencil, but provide opportunities to use all these different technologies. I've had classes where a teacher gave a survey and everybody had to take out their phone and type in and put in the results of the survey so that we could all work off of our phones, which I thought was pretty cool. So all these technologies are out there. There are all these things that are in your toolbox that you can use as a teacher. Take advantage and start using them. And that's all I have for this session here. I do thank you for stopping by. If you are interested in Cloud and Genesis and Hamayan's textbook, you may want to run out to Barnes & Noble or take a peek at Amazon and take a look at this nice tech that's got some nice basic information in it regarding second language learners. If you have any notes or questions, you can pop them in down there, and if not, I will see you later. Bye-bye now.